Good evening. Welcome to a celebration of 50 years of 9 for News. Tonight we'll take a look back at some of the major Queensland news events, people and characters who made the headlines on Channel 9 Brisbane.
The stories you'll see are part of our state's rich history. Some have defined and changed the way we live. We'll hear from Queenslanders who were involved or can recall how those news stories affected them.
We'll also keep you informed with the latest results as tonight's important election count takes place. We'll cross to Andrew Lofthouse and our panel in the tally room throughout the next 2.5 hours.
As we wait to find out which party will govern our state, it seems fitting to start tonight with politics, Queensland style. No one could ever say it's boring. In 1961, Clem Jones swept into the mayoral office. He was to preside over council for a record 14 years. He became known as the father of modern Brisbane.
And I don't think we give Clem Jones enough credit for what he did to sewer the whole of the city in the period that he did.
Well, Clem may have cost the dunny men their jobs, but he also cost the tram drivers their jobs.
Queensland in 1968 was summed up by trams in Queen Street.
Clem scrapped them, and who knows if we had have had them today that they might have still fixed our gridlock. We mightn't even have gridlock now if we still had them, but, you know, we'll never know.
Next to don the mayoral robes was Sally Ann Atkinson.
The Lord Mayor had the opportunity to wear her official robes.
I was always a fan of Sally Ann Atkinson. She was a pretty amazing lady.
She set 2 records as the first Liberal Party councillor to become Lord Mayor and the first woman to wear the robes and chain.
And I think that she did a lot for Brisbane in her role as the Lord Mayor.
I think if you framed a market on the Lord Mayoral race leading into the election with Sally Ann Atkinson and Jim Sawley, Sally Ann would have been 10-1 on and Jim Sawley would have been 50-1. But bolters do get home.
People either liked him or didn't like him, but gosh, he was out everywhere. He was in amongst everything.
The late Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen was elected to Parliament in 1947. He became Premier in '68. Although not a big man, he was to cast a giant shadow across Queensland politics for 3 decades.
Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen achieved a great deal for Queensland in that he opened up the coal industry at a time in the late 60s, early 70s with Sir Leslie Teese opened up the coal industry with the Japanese at a time when people still remembered the war. So that was a good thing.
Well, the guy was adored in the bush, Sir Joe, and strangely enough, a lot of his support, a lot of the money came from, dare I say it, the White Shoe Brigade on the Gold Coast.
In the mid-80s, Joe tackled the unions head-on, sacking almost 1,000 Sequeb workers. The lights went out.
Oh, I remember blackouts. Oh, you know, you had the gas lights set up in the corner, all constantly there waiting, and, you know, torches throughout the house.
Yes, I understand. Prepared to move, sir? Okay, very well, you're under arrest, sir.
Yeah, righto.
Just come with me, please.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
He banned street marches and ordered a compliant police force to make arrests.
For goodness sake, Joe stopped any protest. And so there was always an element of those people who were going to march, whatever the cause.
And bus police in from the country, and they went in boots and all with batons swinging, cracking heads, and seriously injuring people.
Joe ran Queensland like a medieval king.
Those street marching laws were not only reprehensible, they were against the very character of Australian democracy. And I'm pleased that Wayne Goss changed those laws.
Sir Joe also mangled the English language.
White wing, left wing, old guard, new guard, majority group, centre group and all the rest of them, the mud guard, along a barbed wire fence with a foot in each paddock in each party.
It got to the stage where every time he was on television commenting about anything, it was like the greatest show on earth. Everybody switch on TV to hear what he'd say.
You know, I think half of it was the translations, trying to work out what he was saying, and that was the beauty of him. He was not saying anything. He was a perfect politician, always talking and never saying anything at all.
I haven't lost any marbles at all. I don't have any, as a matter of fact.
The Joe era was unique. I remember friends of mine actually joining the National Party because it was good for business. You know what I mean? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more.
They really did take paper bags up to Joe's office. They really did do things like that. And it's the stuff that you think, no, surely they don't do it. Why don't they just use a bank transfer, you know?
Bjelke-Petersen faced criminal trial for perjury after the Fitzgerald inquiry. The jury could not reach a verdict. The trial was aborted, but Sir Joe was never cleared.
They have not proved that I am other than innocent. I am innocent. I always will be.
Ravaged by Parkinson's disease, he died at his Kingaroy property in 2005.
Well, of course, he was controversial and he was stubborn, and he became a national figure. His influence stretched beyond the Queensland border.
And I think it was tragedy what happened to him in the end, because he did contribute a great deal to Queensland.
I think eventually, when the history of Queensland is written, they will see the Bjelke-Petersen years as a black part of our history.
Another larger-than-life figure was the late Russ Hinds. In Joe's cabinet, he became known as Minister for Everything.
Russ Hinds, fair dinkum. Where else in the world would a minister be able to put the main road through the bottle shop that he owns? It could only happen in Queensland circa 1970s.
The brown paper bag was there if you wanted the approval. I think the only thing he didn't do was use the defamation trick. I mean, I think with him it was much more straightforward. Give me the money and here's your approval, you know. And what do you need that council to decide?
And anybody who has an attitude like that, no matter what they're doing, is going to be a target. And naturally enough, he was targeted along with Joe, and they got them both in the end.
One of Big Russ's favourite sayings was, never hold an inquiry unless you know what the outcome will be. Unfortunately, he was named in the Fitzgerald inquiry.
I just want to fight, and I tell you, I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, I'll fight until I die. I'll straighten this one out.
He resigned from Parliament in '88 and died without clearing his name.
Russ Hinds was a larger-than-life character. His reputation was very good as a minister, but clearly was corrupt.
I got up in the House on one occasion, I said to Joe, if you want the boundaries rigged, if you want, you want us to stay in Parliament forever, give me the job.
Perhaps political life is a little bit bland now compared with how it was. You know, when you get people like Russ Hinds.
Commissioner Tony Fitzgerald's findings of widespread corruption meant there was a steady stream of prominent public servants and shady characters fronting courts. 4 cabinet ministers went to jail.
And Don Lane guilty on 27 charges of misappropriation.
Former National Party Minister Don Lane has been found guilty. A district court jury returned its verdict about 30 minutes ago, guilty on 27 charges.
Cabinet colleague Brian Austin was jailed for 15 months.
Joe's cabinet obviously was, some of them were corrupt and they went to jail, but they used to make some decisions.
The guys who made Underbelly, they really should look at making a series on the Fitzgerald inquiry. You know, it had everything, bagfuls of cash, hookers, crooked cops, cops ratting on cops, crooked police commissioner, bag men.
If you wanted a brothel, you know, you went to the bag man, Jack Herbert.
Terry Lewis was making $10,000 a week in bribes and trying to say that he was winning it at the track. An 88% hit rate at picking winners. I mean, who's going to believe that?
Oh, I think there were a few got away. But a police commissioner spent time in jail. And I do think that the Queensland Police Force now is so much the better for the inquiry.
Welcome back to 50 years of 9 for News. Joe's bulldozer mentality was never more evident than the decision to knock down the Bellevue Hotel. The unions had refused to touch the building, a large crowd had gathered in George Street, and the police had thrown up a cordon and a wire fence. Then the Dean brothers arrived.
Save the Bellevue! Save the Bellevue! I didn't even know anything about it. They knocked it down and I got the blame for it.
They revel, I think, in their infamy. There's no doubt about that. They get around with these T-shirts that say, the Dean brothers, all we leave are the memories.
Another pub with a colourful, if exaggerated reputation, the National, also came crashing down.
I actually got married in the National Hotel.
So they had to get rid of those old buildings. The only way the CBD could develop was to push it up. But a lot of the buildings that went were just absolute beautiful.
Once called Luna Park, the Cloudland Dance Hall in Bowen Hills, with its distinctive 18-metre high roof arch, was another building illegally knocked over.
People were furious about that. They'd grown up, gone to dances there, and it was something that they certainly did not trust the people in high places in Queensland politics.
Dean brothers knocked down one of the most historic buildings. I mean, they were given instructions to do it by the Bjelke-Petersen government, so let me be fair. We lost a lot of our wonderful buildings courtesy of the Dean brothers, and they got some pittance of a fine.
The fine, $125 for illegal demolition.
I had many run-ins with them for their contempt of heritage and good planning and good traffic management. It's good that their role in the city has been diminished.
And one of our listeners had been a security guard the night that Cloudland was demolished, and he had pinched off the wall the clock. And 27 years on, it still says 11:10. That's the time that Cloudland was demolished, or at least that's the time the clock was taken off the wall.
I performed at Cloudland when it was on its way down. And after performing there, I totally agree with Joe and the Dean brothers. It should have gone possibly 2 years before that.
It didn't work for me. They used to say, you go there, you're going to die. It didn't work for me.
I can't think of any particular fond memories. I don't think I ever met anyone of any significance up there or formed any lasting relationships. But I do remember the place with some fondness, yeah.
Unfortunately, the regulations of heritage listing weren't in vogue at that time, and I think it was one of the great losses of Brisbane.
Another icon that disappeared without the Dean brothers' help was the Telegraph. Brisbane's last afternoon newspaper was killed off by rising production costs and falling circulation. 115 years after it was first published, the final edition hit the streets in February 1988.
Yeah, they'd run about 7 editions throughout the day, constantly replacing stories, and we'd be phoning copy in from public payphones around the city.
The editor and the chief of staff both had extensions in the saloon bar of the Empire next door, and the paper was run from down there half the time. And
it was time for it to go, simply because afternoon newspapers in the city were not doing a job anymore. And, I mean, television news and stuff took over.
There is less media outlets, the Telegraph's gone, all those afternoon papers have hit the fence, which means less scrutiny.
Brisbane's Festival Hall staged its final concert in August 2003. It was demolished to make way for an apartment development.
The building that's there, Festival Towers, has a museum almost to the rock and roll history that played at Festival Hall. If you go into the foyer, and it costs you nothing to do so, there are photos there going back through the decades of Festival Hall.
Any big name that was in town would work in the Festival Hall. Sitting up in the bleachers with the rain beating down on the tin roof, you had to be there to realise and understand it.
I love Festival Hall. I used to go to the wrestling, you know. Brute Bernard, here he comes. And Big Chief Little Wolf used to put the sleeper hold on people.
I'll never ever forget my first trip to Festival Hall. March 3, 1971, my father and I drove down from Toowoomba to see the wrestling, Chief Wahoo and Killer Carl Cox. Dad organised front row seats, and we both got blood spattered all over us from head to toe. What a night it was!
Everyone's still pursuing Leighton and down he goes.
I used to go there on every fight night, and Tony Mundine was just amazing. He had hands that you didn't see them move.
The action on TV ringside.
The House of Stoush was also the scene of roller derby smasher. If it was worth seeing, it was on at Festival Hall.
The Hoadley's Battle of the Bands there, you know, 4IP were involved in it. We came second in the Hoadley's Battle of the Bands there.
Good girls did not go to Festival Hall.
Yeah, more so than anything else, it was watching the people that went there. It had its own mystique, its own aura. It was a legendary place to go.
So, you know, if something good was on, we went to the Festival Hall and yelled ourselves stupid, of course, sometimes stand on the seats. But it was still a dump. I don't care about whether they knocked it down or not.
While we have lost some historic landmarks, we are gaining others. A bridge over the Brisbane River is so popular, it's been doubled in size. The Gateway Bridge took 5 years to build. An unpopular toll was introduced to cover construction costs. The debt is still not paid.
Now, it's quite evident to everybody that it wouldn't be entirely appropriate to open it, I don't think, because it appears to be in use. So I now declare the bridge to be more open than usual.
But it's been fantastic for Brisbane, the Gateway Bridge. Such a difference for people going from north to south, and perhaps made some difference to that old north-south divide we used to have.
It's used by more than 100,000 cars every day.
The Gateway Bridge, what an absolute nightmare. I remember when it opened, everybody thought, who'll use this bridge? Who'll use it? 3/4 of Brisbane seem to use it every day. They should have built 2 while they're at it.
The Gateway Bridge was the first span that changed traffic movement. The second span will do it again. It just reshaped transport.
When it comes to tallies, Queensland has an unenviably long list of villains, vice, murder and mayhem, from the Black Widow to the postcard bandit and the vampire killers.
Over the past 50 years, our cameras have been there covering those often chilling, sometimes bizarre news events that have left an indelible stain on our state's history.
Wave.
The picture of Daniel just pierces you.
We are desperate for information about Daniel.
With Christmas so close and just days from their son turning 14, it should be a time for the Morecambes to celebrate. This year, though, it's very different.
It's heartbreaking, and to still this day, there's no information, there's no leads of what happened to him.
New information puts an early 80s model blue four-door sedan at the bridge at the time Daniel went missing.
Every time there's another theory about what might have happened to Daniel, murdered, the pedophile ring stuff, I mean, every time there's something else comes up, you just know that Denise and Bruce are considering it and are going to spend sleepless nights just thinking about whether that might be what happened.
It's getting desperate. We need him back. We want Daniel back. Wave.
Just every time I saw Denise Morecambe and that haunted look in her eye, you know, I defy any parent not to feel their pain.
I think the ramifications of that affects every parent and will do until we know what happened to him.
Unfortunately, the Sunshine Coast is the home of two of Queensland's most notorious crimes, the Daniel Morecambe abduction and the murder of Sean Kingy 20 years before.
30 detectives from Brisbane and the North Coast have been working around the clock since Sian was last seen November 28 when she left her mother to ride her bicycle home from the Noosa Fair shopping centre. But she never made it.
Her body was found in bushland near Tewantin on the 3rd of December. She had been stabbed 11 times in the chest, sexually assaulted and had deep wounds to the throat and wrists.
Sean Kingy's murder was just horrifying. You know, a mother of 6 kids luring this beautiful young girl into, you know, for her partner and her to do terrible things to. It stayed with me, that one.
For Barry John Watts, 33, and Valmay Faye Beck, both of Lowood, the walk from police station to courthouse was probably the longest of their lives.
One downside to the case was the vigilante crowd holding a noose outside the courthouse when the two suspects were arraigned in front of the courts. We don't need vigilantes in Queensland.
Everybody was so angry and hated these people for what they did.
How can a woman with 6 kids lure a beautiful young girl like that to a death, to a murder?
When Pauline Hanson came out of prison and said, you know, I met her and, you know, she's not as bad as you think, or whatever she said, just the mere fact that she'd had contact with that woman disgusted me.
Like Valmay Beck or Cram died last year. I think Barry Watts is still in jail somewhere, hopefully never to be released.
At least some justice occurred in the case of Sean Kingy, with both of the killers being convicted. But that wasn't the case with Deirdre Kennedy.
When tiny Deirdre Kennedy, at just 16 months old, was snatched from her bedroom in Ipswich in the middle of the night, her naked body found on the roof of a toilet block, it signalled the end of innocence in Queensland, and no more would we leave our windows open and our doors unlocked.
Horrific. Little baby being found on top of a toilet block. You think, you know, there's some sick people in society.
It was electrical tradesman Raymond John Carroll's irregular teeth that aroused suspicions.
Before the court is 28-year-old RAF electrical fitter Raymond John Carroll of Amberley.
Charged, arrested and jailed for the horrific crime, not once but twice, Raymond Carroll was released on appeal because of the double jeopardy law in Queensland, where you can't be tried twice for the same crime, and is today still a free man.
Turn it off. Well, her mother never gave up, and I recall the guy, I think it was Raymond Carroll, taunted her by turning up at her workplace.
If we can change this law, Deirdre's death won't be in vain.
The issue here, of course, is what happens if new evidence comes forward. Now, she fought a battle, and she's a courageous lady.
As a result of the Kennedy case, the double jeopardy law has been changed.
It took around 30 years for that law to be changed, almost as long as it took for a break in the case of the missing and murdered Mackay sisters in North Queensland, which in 1970 became one of the biggest murder investigations we'd ever seen in the country.
They were waiting to catch a bus to school, and the bus came and went and the girls had disappeared and never seen again.
The Mackay sisters, for me, was the loss of innocence. Two little girls disappeared, and the biggest manhunt in Queensland history.
After 30 years, a woman comes forward and says that the first wife of Arthur Brown, the guy who was charged with the crime, had molested 5 of the first wife's children, and this had occurred in the same place, the same spot where the Mackay sisters had been murdered.
The 86-year-old resident was later taken away for questioning. He was questioned over the murders of 7-year-old Judith and 5-year-old Susan Mackay on the 28th of August 1970.
86-year-old Arthur Brown died during his murder trial, so for all intents and purposes, that case remains unsolved.
Also in North Queensland, another unresolved mystery, the shooting deaths of best friends Vicky Arnold and Julianne Leigh while on an overnight fishing trip.
They took no extra clothes or provisions, expecting to be home for breakfast. They didn't return and haven't been seen since.
A pact between two? Was there somebody else involved there? Was it?
Well, at this stage, we believe that there's no suspicious circumstances.
Why would they say that Vicky killed Julianne?
She'd been shot 3 times, once in the thigh, once beneath the chin, and the 3rd time in the back of the head.
It baffled Queensland, it baffled everybody. Vicky was blamed for shooting her best friend and then somehow turning the gun on herself and shooting herself in the back of the head. Just bizarre.
Despite 5 inquiries into the case which said it was a murder-suicide, I and many, many other people think it was a double murder.
When it comes to mass murderers, Leonard Fraser is up there as one of Queensland's worst serial killers and psychopaths, responsible for the horrific deaths and sexual assaults of 3 women and 9-year-old Kira Steinhardt in Rockhampton. But he was also charged with the murder of Natasha Ryan.
14-year-old Natasha Ryan kissed her mother goodbye, told her she loved her, and then the pair never saw each other again. Her body has never been found, but the prosecution alleges she was murdered at the hands of Leonard Fraser.
It was an absolute sensation, this, when Natasha Ryan turned up, stepped out of the cupboard, literally, during the trial into her supposed killer.
After an anonymous tip-off yesterday, Ms Ryan was found hiding in her boyfriend's Rockhampton home.
Where are you going on holidays today, Natasha? I think I'm going to go in the broom closet.
Guess you need to have a bit of a stretch when you got out.
I could imagine what they were going through. I couldn't feel what they were going through, but seeing now what they have gone through, I can't believe that.
I do feel for her, and through all of that, through her boyfriend being in jail, they've stuck together. They've proven everyone wrong. Anyone who doubted that relationship, they're still together. And good on her, I say.
In some ways, history has proven that their love was genuine because they're still together. But, like, how bizarre.
Now she's a parent, she's going to look back at that in a whole new way. I mean, imagine that, thinking that your daughter is the victim of a serial killer.
The only thing she ended up with was moth bites. But, you know, it was reminiscent of the Fairly Arrow case as well. You know, the disappearance that wasn't and then the springing back up. And I think that makes a lot of people angry. Like, people are still very angry at both of those.
The driver's door of her car was open, as was the front door of the house with the keys still in the lock. A carry bag minus her wallet was on the ground and a single earring.
He didn't hurt me. He just tied me up on a bed and just sat there.
Ms Arrow was allegedly abducted from her Isle of Capri home on Sunday night by an obsessed fan.
We had a sort of a part-time model singer who wanted to add to the crime rate of Queensland, which was large enough by committing a crime against herself.
Had Fairly been ugly, she wouldn't have made page 1.
I can't stop laughing about Fairly Arrow. I don't know where she is now or what she's doing, but she will never, ever, ever live that down.
Fairly Arrow, fairly stupid. I mean,
All that just to get a record deal? She should have just got singing lessons.
Welcome back. It's hard to find a positive when it comes to horrific crime, but if there is one, it's Shari Davies. Her incredible courage and remarkable strength to survive one of Queensland's most vicious and brutal attacks defies all odds.
At 5:30 this morning, a quiet street between Goodness Cemetery and Water Tower was where she lay with 12 stab wounds to the chest, stomach, arm and neck. Her face grey and her fingertips blue from loss of blood.
She showed courage like no other crime victim I know has.
Did this really happen, and could someone really do this? And the reality is yes.
Really, it gave this town pause.
He came up from behind. He had a knife and he threatened me with the knife and ordered me into the car.
To this day, I am still nervous and I still think of her when I go into an underground car park.
The suspect is 23-year-old Darren Osborne of Inala. He was let out of Wacol prison just 8 days before Shari Davies was attacked.
And was incredibly paroled after serving half of something like a 9-year sentence. He'd served 4 years and they let him loose.
Last night, the man who abducted, raped, repeatedly stabbed and left Shari Davies for dead took his own life in a Perth jail.
I'm personally not angry that he's no longer in the planet.
Well, from Shari Davies, an amazing story of resilience and survival, great grit. What about the grit of the little guy from North Queensland, Jonamar O'Shane?
A Hessian bag doused with petrol was thrown over him and set alight.
The poor little boy playing at school, and that happens to him, and the pain that he must have gone through for years.
He is one strong little boy. It actually helped the Aboriginal people as a whole because, you know, the dignity they showed was evident to the whole community.
As far from dignified as you can get, Brendan Abbott. He's escaped from 2 maximum security prisons, first in Western Australia, then in Brisbane. Our most famous bank robber since Ned Kelly, and according to some police, the most cunning and dangerous of all our Queensland crims.
It's now thought Brendan Abbott masterminded the escape.
One of the most prolific robbers of banks that Australia's ever known.
He earned his nickname, the Postcard Bandit, by sending authorities holiday snaps.
I don't know why someone has made a movie about him.
On Christmas Eve in 1993, he made off with almost $800,000.
It was one of numerous leads followed up by desperate police, searching for 5 desperate men.
We haven't got a clue where they are, they're still at large.
Just like all our criminals, you know, Chopper and Ned Kelly and Carl Williams, Brendan Abbott has been turned into a hero in a sense as well, you know.
Bit of an evil guy, though.
Horror, shock, recriminations and disgust. The reactions today to Australia's worst mass murder as a dragnet begins for the killer of 15 people in the Whiskey or Go-Go firebombing.
It was like Brisbane's underbelly, you know what I mean?
The nightclub in St Paul's Terrace was gutted just after 2 o'clock, claiming more lives than any other mass murder in Australian criminal history.
Whiskey or Go-Go seemed to just explode.
All over Australia and overseas, there's been reaction of complete revulsion to the fire killing of 15 staff and patrons.
Organised crime, heavy criminals were not only the prerogative of Sydney and Melbourne, they were right here in Brisbane as well.
Finch and John Andrew Stewart were arrested 4 days after the firebombing. They were both charged with 1 count of murder, convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment.
I want them to know that I had no part whatsoever to do with that fire.
James Finch served 15 years of a life sentence. He was eventually paroled after years of proclaiming his innocence and sent back to England.
I bombed the Whiskey or Go-Go.
And everyone fought for his freedom and finally got his freedom, and the first thing he did when he got to England or wherever he went was admit to it almost. You know, please.
Ironically, 15. The same number of people lost their lives in another fatal arson attack 27 years later at the Palace Hostel in Childers.
Just after midnight, fire engulfed the 100-year-old 2-storey Palace backpacker hostel.
The scene was just chaotic, roaring with flames.
Childers was one of the most heart-wrenching stories that I'd covered.
It was a very quick arrest. Good work from the Queensland Police Force.
Bellona was friendless in the dock when the reality struck home. Life in jail.
This massive manhunt and success with that, but really just all these people coming from all around the world to mourn the loss of their young kids was really heartbreaking.
Most of the state's worst have been men, But lady killers, the Black Widow and the vampire murderers were notorious, and we were mesmerised by these crimes.
I remember that story. It just sent shockwaves through the whole city. I mean, who had heard of anything like that, a vampire killing, and that poor unsuspecting bloke?
Detectives say the man had been stabbed about 20 times. The 47-year-old father of 5 was found behind the South Brisbane Sailing Club in Hill End.
The Witches of Brisbane. It was a shocking case, I think, that disturbed a lot of people. And you know, this is before the Twilight days, where everyone was into vampires. It was a shocking story.
Lesbian vampire killing? That's tabloid gold.
Last week, Tracy Wigington was sentenced to life in jail after confessing to the murder. The three told of how Wigington was involved in satanic worship, witchcraft and blood drinking.
I've been involved in many murder investigations, but this is certainly the most bizarre I've ever struck.
I don't know, maybe the vampires wanted to upstage the Black Widow.
She drugged the 36-year-old and paid 2 men to kill him. It was also revealed she bought a black funeral dress 2 weeks before the murder, leading to her being dubbed the Black Widow.
She had an appeal. There was something, maybe it was the spider into the web.
A woman who puts sleeping pills in her husband's porridge and also buys a black dress 2 weeks before he's killed. A case that doesn't do female killers much good.
Sympathy, forbidden work from someone else, because I was feeling so damn low, and to get the dress cheaper.
Wendy Lang is now out of prison, but Queenslanders were scathing of the Black Widow's crime because it was so premeditated. Just like the horror we were to witness in October 2002, a carefully planned, murderous attack on tourists in Bali, many of them Queenslanders.
Grief and disbelief swept the nation. In Kuta, 2 bombs in 2 clubs exploded, killing 202 people. 88 were Australians. Another 209 people were injured. It was the worst terrorist act since September 11. This single barbaric act made us aware that we were targets.
It was 11:15 at night, peak of party time in the clubs of Kuta, when the terrorists began their coordinated attack. The 2 bombs soon had much of the area on fire. The first blast was in Paddy's Bar. It sent a crowd of survivors charging onto the street. Then a second, much larger explosion, apparently a car bomb, went off outside the Sari Club on the opposite side of the road.
Not long after September 11, and I think people were beginning to think this was going to happen all the time now. This was sort of the world we were living in. And I think the first thing that most people thought was, God, who do I know over there? Because it's Bali, there are Australians everywhere.
It was the first time that terrorism really hit home in a big way in Australia.
Because it was a pretty blatant attack on tourists which were going to be there. So it did make me think that you know, there needs to be some caution and some precautions taken in many places around the world if that could happen in one of our favourite spots in Bali.
Why do these things have to happen in our world? Why is there so many people that can't, you know, just get on with their lives and live in peace and harmony? And it's a shame, but that's the way the world's become.
In October 2004, a young Gold Coast woman was thrust into the glare of the media spotlight. Arrested at Bali Airport, her unlocked boogie board bag was found to contain over 4 kilos of cannabis. Chappelle Lee Corby's detention and court case generated intense media coverage and controversy.
He's saying now that the evidence is pointing to her guilt.
The tears began and Chappelle appeared to be offering short prayers.
Sentenced in May 2005, she's serving a 20-year sentence. Her release date with remissions is currently April 2024.
Marched from court to her new life, prison, guards and handcuffs, saying nothing as she was swallowed by a sea of police. The next 20 years of her life lost in a Balinese jail.
It had Australia glued to the screens as it unfolded live.
I think Chappelle Corby, either A, she's extremely stupid or she was framed by somebody.
Is Chappelle Corby guilty? You'll have your opinion. Some people say she is totally innocent. Is she just an actress? We've seen her on TV. I don't know. But she'll have a lot of time to think about it, and maybe we'll never know.
Whichever side you're on, she's there, and it seems to be a great waste of a young life.
Chappelle Corby, the ganja Queen. I was personally involved in this case, giving evidence in the trial. I don't think it's all over. I think there's a lot still to come out about this case.
Maybe she's locked up away for 20 years and she is innocent, and I hope that's not the case.
Guilty, not guilty, and that is the question that I think still keeps coming up, because I don't know. I still don't know. No one knows.
But I guess in years to come, it's going to be great television, especially when she comes out in 2024. It'll be on 9. It'll be called Under Boogie.
9 Australians were caught trying to smuggle heroin out of Bali in December 2005. Acting on information supplied by Lee Rush, father of one of the mules, the Australian Federal Police contacted their Indonesian counterparts.
Look, I think Scotty's father probably thought that he was going to be arrested once he returned to Australian shores, and to be honest, most of the people around the country thought that's the way that it should have been, but it's not the way that it happened, and I don't think there were too many people that were all that happy with it.
Brisbane's Scott Rush was given a life sentence, which was increased to death on appeal. He is the only one of the Bali 9 still facing the death penalty by firing squad.
When I hear or think of that, the hair stands up on my arms and I feel so sad for him. I just hope that young people learn that you can't break the law and get away with it.
Given up for dead in 1992, Brisbane medical student James Scott was found after 43 days lost in the Himalayas. He attributed his miraculous survival to 2 chocolate bars, melted snowballs, 1 caterpillar, and the discipline of karate training.
I didn't doubt his story. He was an extraordinary young man, and I think that none of us know how we would survive, how we would cope until tested.
When high-profile agent Harry M. Miller got involved, many people believed the story was a hoax.
At the Scott family home in St Lucia last night, James's fiancée and her mother joined his parents and friends to celebrate a phone call they could scarcely believe.
Yeah, I ate Mars bar for weeks after that.
In September 2006, Steve Irwin, the man known worldwide as the Crocodile Hunter, was shooting a new TV series in North Queensland called Deadly Sea Creatures when one of them turned on him.
The 44-year-old was swimming at Bat Reef off Port Douglas around 11 when he was struck in the heart by the barb of a stingray.
You'd expect a photograph of a snake getting his neck, or he was always in danger, but from a fish?
I just think we were blessed to have him for as long as we did, and I was really upset the day he died. It really quite hit me.
He was an absolute hero to so many people.
The Americans and the Europeans knew him so much better than we did, and we just managed to claim him almost after the fact. He was a great bloke, a lot of fun, and it's been a sad loss.
I met Steve on a number of occasions, but one that I remember vividly is when we went down to the mine, the disaster in the mine down in Tasmania, and he was sitting next to me on the plane, and let me tell you, you'd never know it was Steve Irwin. He had this hat on and he had a couple of minders around him and things like that, and you would never notice it until he actually told me who he was.
Passionate, and he proved a lot of scientists wrong. He was a guy who got out there and actually did it himself. His dream will live on.
Welcome back to 50 years of 9 for News. Even a new leader could not erase the political scandals and corruption of the late 80s. Voters turned on the National Party government. They wanted change.
In 1989, well, it was a time of great excitement. It had been 32 years in the wilderness, and all those people who'd worked incredibly hard were ecstatic.
Goss, the boss.
Because when Sir Joe was in power, even though he's a good guy, we were kind of like a national embarrassment. Everybody laughed at Queensland. Gossie came along, he was a lawyer, he was urbane, he looked good. It was a great thing for Queensland.
But I think there's not the slightest doubt his contribution in that very difficult post-Fitzgerald period particularly. He, I think, brought a lot of sanity in.
And I jumped over the fence into the neighbour's place to get the ball, and out comes Wayne Goss. And I was like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Goss, how are you?" And he's like, "No worries, how you going?" And I just jumped back and, Scott, that's Wayne Goss. He's like, "Yeah, he's our neighbour." So, yeah, I've been close to politics at a very young age.
Like all politicians, he was poll-driven and frightened of an electoral backlash. He copped one in the end anyway.
It's ironic, isn't it? The roadway and koalas spelt the end of the Goss regime. But then, just a couple of years later, enter stage left, the media tart.
The protest vote destroyed the Goss government, and alleged irregularities in the electorate of Mundingborough saw Liberal Frank Tanti win the by-election. The numbers in the House were equal. Independent Liz Cunningham supported the coalition and Rob Borbidge became Premier. But the whiff of corruption lingered.
But in a sense, I feel sorry for Rob because he was there in a minority government in a difficult time, and we obviously took advantage of that.
Premier Peter Beattie. I think, he must have used up every sorry he could have come up with. I'm sure he never said sorry to Heather because he said sorry to the Queensland people too often. But he was good. He was a great PR man, could smile a lot.
I think Peter Beattie was an outstanding personality. He stood up for Queensland.
I didn't trust him. I don't trust him. I never liked him. And besides, he was part and parcel of mine going to prison. Say no more.
Waste of money, squandered opportunity, and we face the consequences for the next 20 or 30 years.
From Joe's era right through to even now in a lot of ways, Queensland has really ridden quite a tide of prosperity in a lot of ways.
As for the current incumbents, we'll save them for a later program. Labor set about remaking the image of Queensland in other ways.
Well, you can no longer call Queensland redneck or a blokey state, can you? We've had 3 female governors, more than any other state in the nation.
Lenine Ford was appointed by Wayne Goss. I appointed Quentin Bryce, and Anna Bligh has appointed Penny Wensley.
Now that she's moved on to the Governor-General's role, she's actually out and about in amongst the people, the bushfires. So I think she's a really great role model. She's doing it really well, classily, but nice.
So I think a lot of the Australians felt quite proud. She dressed up, she looked absolutely beautiful every time she was on camera.
Another woman still making a mark is Pauline Hanson. As a disendorsed Liberal candidate, she fired up Australia's far right in the mid-90s, becoming the member for Oxley. She went on to lead the ill-fated One Nation Party.
Pauline, Pauline, Ipswich workers' hero. Pauline, Pauline, Oxley's #1.
Get rid of multiculturalism. Anyone comes on board in this country should know how to speak English.
Her racial views were denounced by many Australians.
She's telling a lot of bullshit. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a racist person.
Well, what have you done for your people? Where has the money gone?
Radically, politically incorrect, and I don't know, people bought into it. Foolishly.
And I think I was watching the 60 Minutes episode where she first came out and said, please explain, and of course that just started a big, media frenzy.
Look, I think there's good and bad in everything, and Pauline Hanson had some extremely good points, but she had extremely bad management.
Well, we've kept her gainfully employed. She certainly managed to make more than a few dollars out of the electoral process.
Pauline, what can you say? Will she ever go away? Good on her, I suppose. They did try to get her once, but I guess she's determined to keep going.
It's 9 weeks since Pauline Hanson was jailed, and while the headlines have faded, the passion, commitment and blinkered faith of supporters refuses to die.
She divided Queensland, she divided the nation, and frankly, it took us a long time to repair that damage. Pauline, I exited. I think you should.
Dubbed the Brigadier of the White Shoe Brigade, the late Mike Gore built Australia's first gated community, Sanctuary Cove. He got the Queensland Government to pass special legislation, the 1985 Sanctuary Cove Act, to exempt the development from local government planning regulations.
Michael Gore had somehow persuaded the state of Queensland to build roads through the swamp so that he could turn the swamp into a building site. His critics say that he behaves as if laws do not exist.
He was in all sorts of strife because he dammed the river without permission. And I said, Michael, what kind of resort are you building? And he said, I'm building a resort that wouldn't allow people like me into it. I thought that was just so Mike Gore.
Mike was an amazing character. He was one of those guys who bulldozed on and got everything done, bullied everybody and got everything the way he wanted to have it. And the critics were crazy. They went nuts because this was happening in southeast Queensland.
Gore and other Gold Coast businessmen, members of the White Shoe Brigade, became influential supporters of Bjelke-Petersen and the Nationals.
Look, there weren't too many people that were happy about that. I think it was pretty public knowledge at the time that 90% of the money that he got to use in his campaign came from the Gold Coast.
Sanctuary Cove opened with a bang. Frank Sinatra performed at what was called the ultimate event. The extravaganza reported to have cost $16 million.
Hey, the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white.
It
when Frank came on, all he did was watch his auto cue because he was getting a bit older at the time, but still was a wonderful voice and a great thing to be at.
Way out of sight.
He brought a certain flair. Sanctuary Cove is still well regarded. I mean, it's one of the important developments and one of the nicer developments in the Gold Coast. And to bring Frank Sinatra in and the razzmatazz, it was good for Queensland tourism.
Another who left a legacy was fugitive businessman Christopher Skase, who died in Spain after a long battle with cancer and a decade-long battle with authorities. The former Quintex boss was pursued to the end, fighting extradition orders from his home in Mallorca.
Christopher Skase was an arrogant man and he was rude sometimes, but he had a presence and he had style. That was the thing about it. The clothes, he looked fantastic back. Didn't look like the guy that we saw in the wheelchair in Mallorca.
The Skase Christmas parties with various themes were massive, massive events. Obviously, a lot of other people were paying the piper for them, but I guess he just flew a little too close to the wind.
He had this great big cake in the shape of a hamburger, because Christopher only ate hamburgers.
In Australia, the government and the media probably owe him, certainly his family, an apology for not believing when he said, you know, I'm really sick, I'm dying. I feel sorry for him that way.
And he was a flawed individual. If you look at some of the developments he did in Queensland, they're still iconic. Port Douglas, Gold Coast, iconic.
A lot of people lost a lot over what he did, and he never tried to come back here to clear his name.
Alan Bond, or Bondi as he's known, is one of the country's most colourful entrepreneurs. A signwriter, he made a small fortune on property, then became a corporate raider in the 1980s.
Bondi liked a beer, so he bought Brisbane's 4X brand and the Milton Brewery.
Bondi bowls in from Western Australia, tries to change our beer, tries to change the 4X sign. No wonder the guys got right up him.
He had us all in the palm of his hand in the America's Cup when he was rising that keel out of the water, and followed it up with trying to turn Queensland's beer into Western Australian. You know, unheard of, and got into the right amount of trouble for that.
In 1987, he paid $1 billion to Kerry Packer's PBL for the Nine television network.
Originally demanding $1 million, Sir Joe said he and Mr Bond shook hands on a $400,000 payout.
And that's what brought him down. When he was deemed not to be a fit and proper person to own a television network.
With his business empire collapsing, he sold the network back to PBL for $250 million. Packer was quoted as saying, "You only get one Alan Bond in your lifetime, and I've had mine."
Alan Bond? Well, I think Kerry Packer did a right out of him.
Sometimes our politicians get funny ideas. Joe had some beauties. In 1980, Stephen Horvath had him convinced the state could have a car industry based on the Horvath hydrogen car. No one got to see the secret reactor that magically broke water down into hydrogen and oxygen.
Mr Horvath's car, once enthusiastically supported as a world-beating local industry, has not surprisingly disappeared from sight.
Isn't that interesting? BMW released the H7 last year, a hydrogen-powered car. Honda released a vehicle called the Clarity, also a hydrogen-powered car.
Homegrown conman Peter Foster earned his first criminal conviction at 20. His next brush with the law was when he claimed people could lose weight drinking Bailin tea. From there, it was diet pills, more teas and more convictions.
There is absolutely no truth to the allegation that anyone was fleeced.
Peter Foster is the king of conmen. I mean, on an international scale, he would medal and probably take gold.
And always well dressed. But then again, the right clothes on the wrong guy.
He is the most charming man, but of course, that's the secret of the con man. You just have to remember to keep your purse shut. Do not get your wallet out.
He's got such great drive and energy, and he keeps popping up all the time. If he had applied all those skills he had to a legitimate business, I mean, he could have done anything.
Foster has spent time in jail in America, Britain, Fiji and Vanuatu, and is currently a guest of Her Majesty in Queensland.
Welcome back. From sport to crime to politics, Over the past 50 years, Queensland has certainly had its fair share of entertaining characters making news. And indeed, some of those have provided the inspiration for some of our real-life, homegrown entertainers.
The brothers Gibb launched their careers playing in pubs on the Gold Coast, but got their big break appearing on TV. Worldwide success came when the Bee Gees returned to the United Kingdom, then penned and performed their unmistakable form of music for the hit movie Saturday Night Fever.
Stay alive. If I'd have just done that.
It started here. We can't take the full credit of it, although we do, of course. I mean, the boys from Humpy Bond, we just love them to bits. But it was an amazing time.
Just to see the way that they went on to bigger and better things was fantastic, and the way that they really grabbed the entertainment industry by the throat with the release of one very famous movie.
I was this warm-up singer, and when my turn was over, out would go their father into this old rusty old car, wake up these kids, and on they'd come and sing in the most beautiful harmonies even then.
They started their early career in Redcliffe, and I got married in Redcliffe, so anything that happens in Redcliffe has got to be good.
If they're not from here, they've come here. In 1964, the Beatles were greeted at Brisbane Airport by 8,000 screaming fans, and a small group who were a bit liverish with the lads from Liverpool.
Everybody else is opening champagne bottles and we're chucking eggs at them. I love this town.
Ah, the Beatles at Festival Hall. What an incredible night that was. As soon as they appeared on stage, the screaming started. It was ear-splitting. Everyone stood up. All the chairs were slid forward. Couldn't hear a thing. Don't know what lyrics they sang, but enjoyed it.
We've definitely attracted some big-name entertainers to Queensland over the years, but there was a time back in 1988 when we wanted to bring the entire world to Brisbane.
There was a lot of alcohol drunk at the expo.
There's those stupid figures that were white that used to, you know, that was new for me. I'd see some, like, you know, something sitting on a seat like that, and I go, wow, how much further forward can art go?
At the time, the biggest impact I noted was in the sex lives of my single friends who used to hit the bars over there every night.
I moved here from New Zealand, and I thought that Brisbane was always like that. I arrived and Expo 88 was on. I got the season pass, I was always there, and all of a sudden the town stopped. I mean, I know they had counselling.
You could just see pretty much the whole of Expo, and the roller coaster, I can't even remember what it was called now, the roller coaster would often get stuck.
You saw the Chinese pavilion, you saw the Russian pavilion, the American pavilion, pavilions, Canadians, all over the world were on display.
It'd be good to line up and talk to people from different nations, and inevitably it'd be there and you'd finally say, you know, hello, how are you? You know, where are you from? And it's Stafford, Mount Gravatt. I never did get to meet anyone from overseas.
If Expo was our chance to bring the world to Brisbane, then the Ekka is our tradition of bringing the country to the city.
I love the show bag.
And the Dagwood dogs, of course.
Look, I've never been a great fan of the Ekka.
Was the octopus, you know, that one that go out there, back there, out there.
You know, the whole time. So it's one of those things when you eat some food and then you get sick afterwards and you don't want to go back, and I haven't been back since, but...
One year I wanted the Aussie action bag because it had the bullet belt with the M16 gun.
It's fairy floss all over the face. It's great.
From Ekka to Expo, fairy floss to F111s, Queenslanders love a celebration. Who could forget Warana?
What's Warana? Oh, obviously before my time. Long time ago. I have no idea.
The Queen of Warana presided over the parade, along with Miss All Nations.
It was one of the early cultural festivals, and of course we've outgrown it, but it was a lot of fun. It really was, and everybody participated, and most of the events were free, and I think that was really important as well.
Like the more updated and explosive Riverfire Festival.
River Fire Festival, wow. What an innovation for the city of Brisbane. We used to turn our back on Brisbane River, and it is a beautiful asset for our city, and now it's come alive.
Everyone goes to see the F111 dump and burn down the Brisbane River. 1 million people turn up with their picnics and bottles of wine.
Actually, I always think of Shorty, Anthony Short, who flew the first F111, the very first river fire. And of course, he then went on to be killed in Malaysia a year or two after that. And I always think of him as the F111 flies over.
Another at times fiery festival, Schoolies on the Gold Coast. Now an accepted and expected rite of passage for our Queensland high school graduates.
The total number of arrests so far for Schoolies Week now stands at 118.
Schoolies problems. Are they as big a problem as we like to believe they are? Geez, I wish they were around in my time.
And I was in training for the Olympic trials. My coach, Joe King, said, "You are not going to Schoolies."
Oh my gosh. I did go to Schoolies Week.
Pretty out of control.
I love Schoolies because they arrive, they're so fresh and they're so young, they're so excited, they're making their bid for freedom. A few days later, they're tired, they're dirty, they're hungry, and they want to go home to mum for a nice meal.
And that's the case even if you're an international star. Academy Award winner Geoffrey Rush keeps coming home to his Queensland roots. One of the shining lights in world film. Born in Toowoomba, he made his name in Hollywood playing an Aussie.
The point is, if you do something wrong, you can be punished for the rest of your life, so I think it's a lifelong struggle. Is it a lifelong struggle?
Yeah.
As soon as Shine came out, everybody knew who he was.
And the Oscar goes to Geoffrey Rush and Shine.
Geoffrey Rush, of course, won the Academy Award. He actually came into the studio. I did an interview with him in the studio just after he won the Academy Award, and it was a great buzz for us because he was a Brisbane boy.
And to Merle and John, my mum and stepdad in Queensland.
I remember seeing it and thinking, who is this guy? I've never even heard of Geoffrey Rush. And then, of course, going on to win the Oscar. And then we saw him not long after that up at Noosa, and he was just like he was a regular guy. And I think that's what's so great about him. He's just such a down-to-earth Queenslander.
I don't think a lot of people knew who David Helfcott was. And you see him afterwards and you realise what a spot-on job Geoffrey Rush did in that performance.
And then there are the chart toppers. Performers like Powderfinger, Keith Urban and the Veronicas hail from Queensland. But it's truly, madly, deeply hard to go past the lads from Logan. Darren Hayes and Daniel Jones teamed up in 1994. Sold over 18 million records and hit #1 on the American chart.
I love you more with every breath, truly, madly, deeply do.
They are the best thing to come out of Logan since IKEA.
I loved Savage Garden. Savage Garden were like this massive Brizzy band when I was growing up. And oh my God, I love you guys, and singing every single word to every single song. Of course I wish they were still around.
Ooh, I want you, ooh, I'm dying to find out.
But I did love Savage Garden, and I do have their 2 albums.
I'll be your dream, I'll be your wish, I'll be your fantasy. I'll be your hope, I'll be your love, be everything that you need.
I'll be your dream, I'll be your wish, I'll be your fantasy. That's why I'm a reporter.
By 2001, the dream and the fantasy was over for Savage Garden and their fans. Darren and Daniel had split. Hayes reportedly saying the duo will never by any chance reunite. We, however, will. Welcome back to 50 years of 9 for News. Brisbane has had its share of important visitors, and none are more loved than the Royals.
The Royals attract thousands in the Mall. The Hawke Economic Summit underway.
80,000 people gathered in the city to watch as the royal couple walked through the Mall and onto the City Hall.
Prince Charles later described today's visit to Brisbane as not a warm welcome, but a boiling welcome.
What a day to remember. 80,000 people, about double what we get for State of Origin, and hasn't security changed? Someone getting close enough to a royal visitor to be able to put a lei around her neck.
I know people who were actually in there for 2 days waiting for that.
When you get a crowd the size of today's, it all becomes a bit much.
In 1986, the city hosted a papal visit. Huge crowds turned out to greet Pope John Paul II as he made his way to a mass held at QE2 Stadium. It attracted pilgrims from around the state and the country. Then it was off to City Hall.
The engineer came and said a few days before, the Pope can't go on that balcony, it's not safe. I said, I don't want to hear this report, I don't want to see it. And the engineer said, but what happens if the balcony falls down with the Pope? And I went, he's the Pope, God will look after him. And he did.
Someone who also wanted to look after the pontiff, a young man described as anti-Catholic and a madman. He was caught casing City Hall, armed with matches and soft drink bottles full of petrol.
The man allegedly told police he was searching for a high vantage position to drop the lot on the Pope below. The reason? The Pope has too much money.
The Pope rarely comes to Australia, but here he was, set to bless thousands and thousands of people, and out steps this madman who threatens to blow him up. But stoic to the end, he went on with the business.
Yes, I'd forgotten about the man with the petrol bombs. I mean, it was the first time we'd had security in City Hall, probably in Brisbane. The sniffer dogs and the police were around, and there were gunmen on the sort of the buildings all around King George Square.
Well, we'd never seen anything like it in Brisbane. 100,000 people getting a blessing. I mean, 10,000 people alone packing into King George Square.
God bless you all the citizens of Brisbane. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
In the late 70s, hundreds of thousands of viewers tuned in to 9 News to see and hear a pet pooch named Sapphire. The dog's owner claimed he could talk.
Mama. Okay, good girl.
But it was classic, you know, bonnet, dummy, and he did actually say, hello, mummy, or whatever he said, because I got it. You know, a lot of people said, oh, that's not happening there, but I heard it.
Okay, you give me that.
Yeah, I was in my mid-teens, I reckon, when all the fuss about the dog in the bonnet was on the telly. I think it was hello, mum, or something. I was hoping for g'day, mate, but it wasn't to be.
Take a bow. Good girl. Okay, sit.
Nicknamed Migaloo, an Aboriginal word meaning white fella, the world's only known albino humpback whale was first spotted off Queensland 17 years ago. Scientists say our favourite white whale is a 1 in 100 million genetic fluke.
Migaloo is what a lovely name. It has a meaning, white one, I think, and it is a white one. It's a great thing for Queensland, and I hope the Japanese spare him if ever they saw him.
I'm afraid I don't care what colour the whales are. I think it's one of the world's most boring activities. I know it's fantastic for people from other places. I know there are some people who go, oh my God, it's a whale. But for me, it's on a par with watching Test cricket. Boring.
Thanks for staying with us as we celebrate 50 years of News on 9. Now, no matter which party is in government or which political persuasion you may be, Queenslanders are renowned for joining as one when it comes to their state mates. And ironically, nothing brings us together more than a tragedy.
And all of a sudden there's a huge explosion, and it just took everything in its path and went right through to the back of the house.
And there was a lightning strike that hit about 50 metres away from our house.
I've never seen anything like this in Brisbane. The devastation is extraordinary.
Is the Gap a disaster zone?
This is ground zero, if you like, the Gap. And in street after street, house after house, damage in some way.
And we ran around the corner, and there was this woman's cousin, Melissa. The top half of her house had gone. Brick house, the top half gone. And she was standing there crying. She hadn't been able to get onto her insurer. She didn't know what she was going to do. And that image has stayed in my mind since the morning after those storms.
I woke up in the middle of the night and had Brisbane River in my backyard. And when it finally subsided, I had a boogie board in a tree and someone else's outdoor furniture. So if you live around that area and you're missing your furniture, it's at my place.
Here we are! And these guys go, whoa, chainsaw! So let rip. So we just worked our way up cul-de-sacs with the chainsaw, and it was just terrific to see everyone. And that sort of thing that gets to you, people pulling together.
It was the same sense of community spirit seen 3 decades earlier in the aftermath of Cyclone Wanda. But tragically, back in 1974, 16 people were killed, 1,600 houses went under, another 13,000 were damaged, and 56 were just swept away as the southeast submerged.
That was a time that those of us who were there will never forget.
74, I lived in Daisy Hill, and let me tell you,
If the water got to us, you could forget most of Australia, I think.
They let the dam out, and this chap came to the door and he said, "You've got to get out, Mrs. Brady." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "There's 16 foot of water coming down." And I said, "That'll be over our house." He said, "It's over mine already."
My father put everything on the wardrobes because, you know, you have to get all the valuables up on the wardrobes. Of course, it came over the roof.
I remember seeing Don Seckham reporting on that. It was so sad. He was crying. It was just so emotional.
I just feel so sorry for these people.
And I think it was my first experience of people getting together and helping each other. Everybody who knew somebody who'd been flooded was out there helping.
My grandparents were on the other side of town and we couldn't get to them, and there was real fear in the family.
But it was dreadful what happened around Queensland. I mean, who would ever think that the Brisbane River could rise so high? Never before, and hopefully never again.
32 years after Wanda, Cyclone Larry unleashed an even greater fury, but this time those in Innisfail bore the brunt.
Ground zero. Cyclone Larry, a Category 5 monster, is directly above, spinning a circle of destruction with its 290 km/h winds. It was the fiercest cyclone to ever touch the Queensland coast.
Every night on the news, we'd sit and watch more and more, and the devastation, the true extent of it, was seen.
How bad was that for all the people of North Queensland? But what about those bananas? Struth were paying $7 a banana for a while. It seemed to be the economic index, the price of bananas.
From Innisfail and Cape York to the Gold Coast, where in 1967 and 68 it copped not one but 7 cyclones. The first, Dina, rated a Category 4 and branded the biggest ever at the time, ripped through our holiday hotspot.
I remember seeing the images of it, and, you know, where it's all cut away and all these houses just hanging there.
Some beautiful, beautiful homes were teetering on the edge and about to drop into that drink.
Mate, it washed out Jefferson Lane. A mate of mine got in early and went and knocked on every door until he got a great home there. Because people wanted to get out. I mean, it devastated people along that beachfront. But he thought this is the time to buy.
Everyone's like, "Oh no, there's a cyclone coming." I'm like, "Oh yes, here it comes, sweet, we're on here." You know, so I never want anyone to be hurt. I don't want any people's houses to get blown away or anything, but cyclone season for me is the most exciting part of the year.
How far down the track is it going to be before we see that sort of stuff again? I don't think we're out of that.
And it's not just our coastal towns that cop it. Over the decades, inner Queensland towns often had to contend with the fallout. Floods. In 1990, Charleville almost went under.
At 5:15 this morning, the government declared a state of emergency.
It's very hard to imagine a place like Charleville going underwater for a lot of people along the eastern seaboard. They believe it's just the driest place of all time, but just to be able to see that on the TV cameras, to watch the news and see how much they were struggling was absolutely terrible.
One part of Queensland's in drought, the other's in flood. I don't know, go figure.
You get out there and the cracks were just huge. You could fall into them. There was nothing. It was just dust.
This once prosperous grain and dairy district is being hit hard.
1977, the southeast was gripped by drought and tough decisions had to be made.
The dam dried up months ago. The whole place is a dust bowl.
The seemingly never-ending drought has also dried up some Queensland childhood traditions, as our once taken for granted on-tap water has become a precious commodity.
You know, we as kids used to slide down the driveway with the hoses on and detergent and just waste so much water.
And it's really made us start to think about our water use, 140 litres of water per person per day.
Someone in their wisdom decided that water tanks should go. And what are we all doing now? Putting in water tanks.
Cyclones, storms, water restrictions, floods, fire, we've had it all. But no one could have forecast the natural disaster that hit Queensland in 1994, when a mystery virus killed 14 horses and spread to humans.
My name's Vicky Rail, I'm from Queensland. I'm one of the mug trainers, I suppose you'd call me, you know.
Word of 49-year-old Rail's death spread quickly.
He was one of those knockabout kind of country trainers. He was no glamorous, you know, Tommy Smith or anything like that, but he had a horse called Vo Rogue.
Those viruses scare the hell out of people because you're never quite sure how widely it will spread. And it's just like the SARS virus. People worry about skipping from animals to people.
But it's not just natural disasters we've had to cope with. Over the last 50 years, Queensland has seen some terrible accidents and shocking loss of life on above and below ground. 24 people died when an Ansett Viscount crashed near Winton in 1966. It remains today one of Australia's worst air disasters.
40 years on, in May 2005, another tragic loss of life when in bad weather a metro liner slammed into a mountain on approach to the Lockhart River airfield. All 15 people on board perished. And in our worst peacetime air disaster, 18 soldiers were killed when 2 Army Black Hawk helicopters collided during training in Townsville.
Last night, it was a scene more like war than peacetime Townsville.
Tonight, we've had a catastrophe.
The unthinkable had happened. 18 mates dead in a training field, not a battlefield.
It just seemed like a really awful waste, and I know that there was a lot of Queenslanders that were directly affected by it.
Look, the Black Hawk helicopter crash really was something that went right through the state, not just Townsville. There's a lot of our country's finest military personnel up there, and you've got to feel very, very sorry for the boys.
The word hero is thrown about sport way too easily, and you only have to look at that Black Hawk routine mission, and 18 families are without their heroes. It makes sport seem very, very small.
They will never be forgotten. Tragically, they are now part of Australia's history.
A grim reminder of the bravery of our Defence Forces. But tragedy can strike anyone, anytime. September 1990 will forever be remembered as one of the darkest days on Queensland roads when a bus full of elderly passengers lost control on Tamborine Mountain.
Turned around the corner and the driver couldn't hold it and we went straight over the top.
I could see 3 or 4 that were dead.
In all, 11 were killed, another 33 injured. We arrived just after the first ambulance arrived, and I got out and went down there, and we were basically first on scene, the cameraman and I. And there was no reporting going on. We were helping people out of the bus, and I was trying to comfort some old people who were lying on this little bit of carpet, and I was holding an old lady's hand. And then someone turned around and spoke to me, and when I turned back, she died.
When tragedy strikes, you hope and pray that lessons are learned so that history doesn't repeat. But for our hard-working miners, sadly, that hasn't been the case. 18 men died in the Box Flat mine explosion near Ipswich in 1972. 36 lives have been lost underground in Mara in 3 separate occasions since 1975. The most recent in 1994, when 11 were trapped.
Tunnel of Death, the headline reads. 9 men escape. The nation bleeds for 11 brave miners trapped down below. Are they alive? Can they survive? Oh God, how long before help can arrive? The ghosts of Mara, 25. It was just dreadful to think that we buried people underground.
Thanks for staying with us as we look back on 50 years of 9 for News. Competition for our votes is one thing, competing for Queensland yet another. When it comes to representing our state, it's right up there with the honour of playing for the country. Just ask some of our State of Origin players.
But we're a state chock full of fabulous and talented sporting stars, swimmers and surfers, tennis champions and cricket greats. Arguably our state's most shining sporting moment in the past 50 years is the 1982 Commonwealth Games.
And there's a sight that has really got the crowd stirred.
No one was allowed to see the preparations for it. It didn't matter who you were, you could not see it. You were locked out. And who could forget Matilda the kangaroo coming into that main arena and then giving everybody the big wink.
I watched Tracy Wickham when she was just the best thing ever, still do. And I still remember when she won, because she won by such a long way.
We were all in the Commonwealth Games spirit.
Just made you feel proud to be a Queenslander and a Brisbane boy.
Perhaps that pride had been reignited 2 years earlier.
West. There's a kick-off.
Running onto the field alongside Arthur Beetson, you know, an absolute hero when I was a young boy.
Beats it on the blind, back inside to Lewis, turns it away to Oliphant, they're moving nicely, Smith, Meninga, close, gets it away to Boosted, this could be the try they're after, yes it is, he's over.
The crowd, the noise when the boys ran out was fantastic, and when the fight started, that was even better.
Queensland, oh gee, there's a big one by Wynn, Beetson came at him.
Actually, all you've got to do is look at the second game from 1989 at the SCG and watch Wally score that amazing try in that courageous victory by Queensland. They've never done it better.
He's in!
got to score this runaway try, but the greatest thing was that the Queensland team at the end of that game got a standing ovation from the New South Wales crowd.
Game 2, 1991, pouring rain, Wally Lewis versus Mark Geyer.
That's half-time, and they still go on with it.
With a stroke of genius would have had to have been Wayne Bennett brought back Alfie Langer for the State of Origin and actually brought it back to Queensland, which was a pretty special move.
Probably the best secret I've kept.
You can never get tired of beating New South Wales in State of Origin, that's for sure.
I think that they've got to... In the wilderness for so long, State of Origin brought league victories back to Queensland. But it was nowhere near the struggle we had to win a Sheffield Shield.
And a chance for Rackerman, he's grabbed it. Carl Rackerman has taken the catch that wins Queensland their first ever Shield final.
It's what every Queenslander had waited for years and years and years. Unbelievable.
The great Jimmy Marr made that comment after the game about the Valiant.
Yeah, we're now number 1. It's about time.
For cricket moments, though, it was the tied test at the Gabba in 1961 between Australia and the West Indies that is etched in history.
Clive Harburg was the ABC commentator at the time, and he actually lost his voice. He got so excited about this tied test.
Well, the tied test was one of the great chokes of all times. I say it to Richie Benno and Alan Davison all the time, to lose so many wickets in the last over and run-outs and chaos happening around the Brisbane ground. You know, you'd get in so much trouble these days, but it's gone down as the best game ever.
But often over the years, sport has its scandals. And there's nothing to rival the controversy of the fine cotton ringing affair at Eagle Farm in 1984.
Fine Cotton's going to hold on, I think. Oh, he's just in front. Oh, he may have won by a nose. There's nothing in it.
They'd be sitting around a room going, why don't we get one with a white flash down the front here? And look at that one. Exactly the same. The stewards aren't going to know.
It was the most botched operation you've seen in your life. The horse actually turned pink when they tried to add or change its colour.
I think I was probably the only person in Brisbane who didn't try and get a bet on that day. Everyone in the country knew that the fix was on.
They only won better if they'd have done a man in a suit, you know, like the front end and the back end and going for it. That's so Queensland, I loved it.
But don't we just love a Queensland winner?
Gun Sind became the idol of Australian racegoers because of his outstanding ability and film star status.
He was owned by a group of people then living in Goondiwindi, and so he became known as the Goondiwindi Grey. And
He had 29 wins from 54 starts, but not so successful with the mares, interestingly. He went to stud, wasn't quite the performer he was on the track.
Holds it, he feigns to kick, gives it to Gavin Allen, back to Allen Langer, that's a try!
Let's go Broncos! We're gonna time, we're gonna go!
And I think a lot of people were very glad to have him on board that guaranteed Brisbane 6 premierships.
Growing up for me, league was everything. Friday night in front of the TV, watching the Brisbane Broncos play.
seeing the Lions win 3 premierships will always be top of the tree for me.
He'd dearly love to land a blow for the Lions! And he's done it!
I've never seen a greater team with a better coach and superior players than the Brisbane Lions. They were absolutely unstoppable.
Bit like our swimmers.
They roll off the tongue. Holland, Perkins, Houseman, and of course Hackett.
This has been his greatest performance.
Susie was just sensational.
Look at this, she's pulling away. What a terrific swim. Finally, goal to Australia.
Swimmers in Queensland, we just seem to breed them, don't we? They come out with fins almost.
Well, our world champion surfers just might.
Mick Fanning has got what it takes. He's got the will to win, he's got the talent, he's got everything there. Could be one of the best surfers ever to come out of Australia.
And still at the beach.
Yeah, Grant Kenny I think was great. When I was young and I was just trying to become a competitor, I watched him and watched his will to win and be a great champion, and it did influence me.
He was the first guy that made budgie smugglers look cool.
He was a super Ironman who'll go down as a legend of the sport and is now kind of making his name as a legend in business as well. Trevor, yeah, he's definitely someone that I looked up to at that stage of my career as someone that I had been told that had trained really hard and was just a good role model for young kids.
From Iron Men to men with nerves of steel.
And now I'm driving without a clutch
virtually. Johnson took the checkered flag 16 seconds in front of Longhurst. But
Lakeside was probably one of the best circuits in Australia, bar none. It was fast. It had a lot of very difficult parts of the racetrack, but it's where I enjoyed many, many good moments, and especially that's where I won the first Australian Touring Car Championship in 1981, which was a really big deal.
You do a couple of laps in a car with Dick Johnson and get down on your knees and bow to the gods of racing and realise that no, he's just something different.
A standout for certain. When it comes to staying standing, there's only one.
They've all gone down. Bradbury is going to come through. The Australian has crossed the line first.
I could watch that 100 times. I love that moment. I don't think of that as luck. I think he created that. That was special.
First Olympic winter medal. Good on you, Steve.
Just as good as gold. Our Queenslanders immortalised in bronze.
I love the Brisbane Bullets.
There was nothing going to stop Leroy Loggins, who moved into overdrive.
Just the hype, and I think that whole atmosphere at Boondall was pretty amazing.
I wander down Caxton Street and end up in front of Lang Park and give old Wally, the bronze Wally, a hug. I love that statue.
And then there are our greats.
I guess Greg started out as a big kid who could hit a golf ball. You know, you don't become the first legend of Australian golf in an era without charisma.
They used to say they saw him going to work. When they used to go to work in the morning, here he was putting out of or chipping out of a bunker at RQ. And when they went home in that afternoon, he's still there at the bunker chipping it out.
A fascinating guy with a great eye for business, but his persona made golf sexy.
The outstanding female swimmer has been Wickham. I mean, her world record stood for nearly 20 years, and she beat the East Germans when they were on drugs.
That'll do it. Unbelievable result.
We love our Pat. We love him.
When he went on to win the US Open 2 years in a row, was just not only great for Australia, but great for Queenslanders that he was ours. And I don't think there's been anyone since him really that has, you know, captured everyone's imagination.
The twice he won the US Open, both times he gave half the prize money to the Starlight Children's Foundation. I mean, that's the sort of guy, forget the guy in the undies, he's got a big heart.
Hot to boot, you know, the ladies love him.
This is a famous victory, a magnificent performance.
I guess the pinnacle. Little girl from the bush who could run.
And when she stepped out there at the Sydney Olympics in that outfit, wow, it was caused a stir, all right. And then really kicked her on away as being an Aboriginal ambassador.
The pressure that was on that kid after she'd been given the honour of lighting the Olympic torch to go out and blitz them in the 400 metres.
That brings us to the end of our look back over the last 50 years of Queensland news. Obviously, we couldn't fit in all the stories that Channel 9 has covered in the last half-century.
The news is not always what we want to see or hear, but it is news because it affects people and communities. Television and Channel 9 News will go on as long as pictures are part of our lives. Thank you for watching. In a moment, we'll go back to Andrew Lofthouse in the tally room.
But we will leave you with pictures of our elected representatives' media stunts. Some made us laugh, some made us cringe, and a few were downright dangerous.
Through the city backsides, I see the stars come out of the sky. Yeah, the bright and hollow sky. You know it looks so good tonight. I am the passenger. I stay under glass. I look through my window so bright. I see the city.
Regrets, I've had a few.